"You'll never be anything more than a barcode scanner, loser." That was the line that haunted Mark every single night. It wasn't said once. It wasn't even said jokingly. It was repeated day after day, month after month, by the people he was forced to call his coworkers. Mark was 23 when he took the cashier job at a local retail store. It was supposed to be temporary, just enough to pay rent, just enough to survive. But temporary turned into 3 years, then 4. And with every year, the weight of humiliation grew heavier. His colleagues, especially Jake and Sarah, treated the store like their kingdom, and Mark like their personal punching bag. Jake would toss items onto Mark's counter and say, "Careful, don't break a nail pressing those buttons." Sarah would laugh and whisper loudly, "Imagine working here forever. That's Mark's dream job." Customers joined in too. Some looked at him with pity, others with disdain, as if wearing a cheap red uniform meant he was beneath them. But the worst moment came one Friday night. The store manager organized a small staff party in the break room. Everyone was laughing, joking, drinking sodas. Then Jake decided to play Truth or Dare. When it was Mark's turn, Jake smirked. "Truth, do you honestly think you'll ever get a real job? Or Dare, admit in front of everyone that you're just a loser who'll never leave this store." The room went silent. Sarah giggled. The others stared, waiting for Mark to crumble. Mark's chest tightened. His face burned. He wanted to scream, to fight back, but instead he whispered, "Pass." Laughter erupted. Cups slammed on the table. That word, pass, became his new nickname. Every shift Jake would greet him with, "Hey, pass. Still stuck here?" That night, Mark sat in his tiny one-room apartment, staring at the peeling paint on the walls, and made a vow. His hands shook, his eyes burned with humiliation, but his voice was steady. "One day, I will never hear that word again. And when I rise, they will beg me for a chance to stand where I stand." And from that moment, revenge was no longer just a fantasy. It was a plan. Days turned into weeks and weeks into years. The store wasn't just Mark's workplace anymore, it was his prison. Every morning he'd clock in at 9 a.m. sharp, force a smile for customers, and scan item after item until the beeping sound of the register echoed in his skull like a curse. Beep, beep, beep. Over and over again, like the rhythm of a life going nowhere. Jake loved to put on a show whenever the manager wasn't around. Once, he held up a bag of dog food and said loudly, "Perfect match for Mark. Loyal, obedient, and dumb as a rock." Another time, Sarah deliberately dropped an entire basket of groceries on Mark's counter, sneering, "Let's see if our superstar cashier can handle it." The customers laughed. Some even pulled out their phones to record. The videos circulated in private chats between employees. Mark saw one once titled, "Cashier Breakdown Incoming." But he never broke. He swallowed the anger, pushed it down, and let it harden into something else, determination. The breaking point came on Christmas Eve. The store was packed. People rushed in, desperate to buy last-minute gifts. The line at Mark's counter stretched halfway down the aisle. He was sweating, his hands moving as fast as he could. Suddenly, Jake yelled across the store, "Hey everyone! Want to see Santa's saddest little elf?" Sarah chimed in, "Careful, Jake, don't overwork him. We don't want him fainting before midnight." The crowd chuckled. Some customers actually clapped. Mark kept scanning, but his vision blurred. His chest pounded. When his shift finally ended, he didn't go home. He sat in the empty parking lot, freezing in his car, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He whispered the same words again and again. "This isn't the end. This is just the beginning." And so, while Jake and Sarah spent their weekends partying and laughing, Mark spent his in silence. No friends. No parties. No distractions. He bought an old laptop on credit, second-hand and slow, but it was enough. Night after night, after his grueling shifts, he stayed awake until dawn. He watched tutorials, read free guides, failed countless times but kept going. His coworkers thought he was wasting his life. They saw only a tired cashier who dragged himself into work every morning. But behind closed doors, Mark was building something they could never imagine. Revenge wasn't coming tomorrow. It wasn't coming next week. But it was coming. And when it did, the entire store would remember the name they once mocked. Not pass. Not loser. But boss. Mark's nights were a battlefield. By day he scanned groceries. By night, he fought with lines of code on a flickering old laptop that overheated every hour. He barely slept. Coffee replaced meals. His hands shook, but not from fear anymore, from exhaustion. There were moments he nearly quit. One night at 3 a.m. the screen froze and hours of work disappeared. He slammed his fists on the desk, tears of frustration spilling onto the keyboard. Maybe Jake was right, he muttered. Maybe I really am just a cashier. But then he remembered that Christmas Eve, the laughter, the humiliation, and the way his chest burned with shame. That memory lit a fire stronger than any failure. He wiped his eyes and whispered, "No. I'll prove them wrong." Months passed. His first attempts at freelancing were disasters. Clients underpaid him, ghosted him, or demanded endless revisions. Mark worked for pennies, but every project taught him something new. Slowly his skills sharpened. The tired cashier who could barely open a spreadsheet was now building websites, designing apps, writing complex code. His confidence grew with every late-night victory. And then it happened. One of his small projects, a simple task manager app, went viral on a tech forum. Overnight, downloads skyrocketed. His inbox filled with messages from investors and job offers from companies he had once only dreamed about. By the end of that year, Mark's bank account wasn't empty anymore. For the first time in his life, he didn't have to check his balance before buying groceries. He moved out of his crumbling apartment into a sleek loft with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. The cashier uniform was gone, replaced with suits tailored to fit him perfectly. But Mark didn't stop. Success was no longer about money. It was about the promise he made to himself that freezing night in the parking lot. He founded his own tech company, starting with just 2 employees in a rented office space. But within 3 years, it exploded into a multi-million-dollar business. Articles were written about him, from cashier to CEO, the incredible journey of Mark Rivers. Investors called him a genius. Colleagues respected him. Strangers admired him. But Mark didn't care about strangers. He cared about Jake. He cared about Sarah. He cared about every single person who had laughed at him, recorded him, mocked him for being just a cashier. Because now the tables were about to turn. The announcement came quietly. The retail store where Mark had once worked was shutting down. Sales had plummeted, management was bankrupt, and employees were left scrambling for jobs. Among them were Jake and Sarah. Mark found out through LinkedIn. The once smug cashier queen Sarah was now posting desperate messages, seeking opportunities in customer service or administration. Please share. Jake, once the king of mockery, was reduced to applying for entry-level jobs he used to sneer at. Mark stared at their profiles for a long time, a smirk tugging at his lips. And then, almost too perfectly, their resumes appeared in his company's inbox. Jake, Sarah. Applying for positions under him. The same people who once called him pass. Now begging for a chance to pass his interview. Mark leaned back in his leather chair, the city skyline glowing behind him, and laughed for the first time in years. Not a bitter laugh. Not an empty one. But a laugh filled with the taste of victory. The moment of revenge had finally arrived. The day of the interviews arrived. Mark sat at the head of a long glass table, his company's logo glowing behind him on the wall. He wore a dark tailored suit, sharp as a blade, and carried himself with the calm authority of a man who no longer had anything to prove, except one thing. The door opened. First came Jake. He looked older, worn down, the cocky smile long gone. His tie was crooked, his hands fidgeting nervously. When he saw who was sitting across the table, his face drained of color. "Mark?" he stuttered. Mark didn't smile. He didn't move. He just stared, letting silence do the work. "Wow, long time no see," Jake chuckled nervously. "Listen, about the past, we were just kids, you know? Messing around. No hard feelings, right?" Mark finally leaned forward, his voice calm but razor sharp. "Do you remember Christmas Eve? Do you remember what you called me in front of everyone?" Jake's lips trembled. He couldn't answer. Mark slid a folder across the table. Inside wasn't a contract. It was an old photo. A still frame from the video Jake had recorded of him years ago, standing behind the register, humiliated. Jake swallowed hard. "Look, man. I've changed. I need this job. Please." Mark's eyes didn't soften. "You're right. You do need this job. But you're not getting it." Jake froze. "What? You can't." Mark's tone cut like steel. "I can. And I just did. Security will show you out." Sarah came next. She was still polished, still tried to hold on to her old arrogance, but desperation clung to her like a shadow. She smiled tightly as she sat down. "Mark. Oh my God, you look amazing. I always knew you'd go far." Mark interrupted with a single raised hand. "Save it. Do you remember when you dumped an entire basket of groceries on my counter? Do you remember how you laughed while I struggled?" Sarah's fake smile faltered. I was young. It was stupid. I'm sorry, okay? People grow up. Mark studied her for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he slid another folder across the table. Inside was her own resume, stamped in red ink with one word, rejected. Her hands shook as she picked it up. Mark, please. I really need this. I can change. I'll work hard, Mark stood. His voice was steady, calm, final. No, Sarah. You already showed me who you are. And I don't hire people who laugh at others' pain. Her eyes filled with tears. For the first time, the queen of mockery had nothing left but silence. As the doors closed behind her, Mark stood alone in the room, gazing out at the city skyline. This was it. The moment he had dreamed of during those endless nights of humiliation and despair. The cashier they once ridiculed had become the CEO who held their fate in his hands. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to gloat. The revenge was complete in their silence, their regret, their downfall. Mark whispered to himself, just loud enough to hear. I told you. This was only the beginning. And with that, he turned away from the past, ready to face a future they could never touch.